Welcome to Lesson 10. Be sure to refer to the PowerPoint presentation associated to this lesson for more information and energy exercises. So let's talk about the principles of knighthood that form the foundation of the Order of Paladins. Knighthood emerged in the 11th century. It was originally a professional organization, and it included those men who could afford to make and maintain the heavy capital investment required by mounted warfare, horse and armor. Its members included nobles and landholders, large and small, free men and craftsmen. Even in the feudal era, anyone who, by luck or effort, managed to obtain the training and equipment to be a knight could eventually enter that class. For example, in Flanders, there's a famous case of a family of serfs who entered into the knighthood and became castellans in the 12th century. In the beginning, then, knights were not necessarily nobles, nor were nobles necessarily knights. Nobility and knighthood slowly emerged from the 12th century onward. Nobles became knights with increasing frequency. From the 13th century onwards, heredity became increasingly important as the sons of knights took up their father's profession of arms. Thus, knights' sons became squires, and that led to an emphasis on ancestry as a qualification for knighthood. Legal restrictions became imposed. For example, in the late 13th century, a decision of the Parliament in Paris forbade the Count of Artois from making the lanes or serfs into knights without the king's consent. Those who had achieved knighthood without these qualifications were fined, which actually led to some people accessing the knighthood by purchasing the title. There is ample historical evidence to show that women were knights too. An example is probably going to spring into your mind. That would be Joan of Arc, although there's no actual evidence that she had such a title. However, Jean's family was made noble, with nobility transferable through women, which was quite unusual. Jeanne d'Arc did ride a horse and dress up in armor, but she didn't wield a sword and never killed anyone. She carried a banner, not a sword. But if you're looking for a female order of knights, how about the Order of the Hatchet? This Orden de la Hacha was formed in Catalonia in 1149 by Raymond Berenger, Count of Barcelona, to honor the women who fought for the defense of the town of Tortosa against a Moor attack. The Moors had laid siege to the town in December 1149. On December 31st, the women of this town donned male clothing and surged to the attack, raising the siege. The dames admitted to the order received many privileges, including exemption from taxes, and took precedent over men in public assemblies. Now, the order takes a lot of its patterns from military monastic orders, which started in the 12th century with a strong influence of Cluny monks, which led to development of military monastic orders. This introduced an element of chivalry, at least in theory, to knighthood, just as Bushido became the ethos of the samurai. During the Crusades, knights formed professional associations, strict quasi-monastic lifestyles, and institutionalized structures defined by statutes and managed by officers. Their goals included the sanctification of their members through their devotional and charitable activities, the protection of pilgrims, as well as defensive military operations. The original military monastic orders were the Order of St. John from about 1080, the Templars, 1119, the Abbés in 1143, the Alcantara in 1156, the Calatrava in 1158, the Santiago in 1168, and the Teutonic Knights in 1190. So, the Templars, you've probably heard that they eventually, in the 18th century, were destroyed by the French king, who figured that he wanted their money and came up with reasons why they should be considered heretics. However, stories circulated claiming that Jacques de Molay, the leader of the Templars, on his way to the stake, appointed someone as a successor and entrusted him with perpetuating the order in secrecy. That successor is variously named as the preceptor of Auvergne, who had fled to England but died there in jail, or an English knight. The successor is said to have gone to England or Scotland and found refuge among the Freemasons, who were just then coming into being at that time. Knights Templars became a grade in some forms of Freemasonry in the 18th century, and an offshoot of that grade became an order in the US and Canada in the 19th century. There are many other examples of monastic orders that have survived into the modern era. So basically, because each institution tried to use the prestige of the previous one, imitating it, the term Order of Knighthood has gradually been passed on and is now used for modern awards and decorations, which are neither orders nor composed of knights. In modern society, only very few orders survive from the times of the Crusades. and most orders of knighthood awarded by sovereigns or governments, such as the English Garter or the Spanish Golden Fleece, are, in spite of their historical connection, awards of merit. Knights faded into history, but the legends surrounding them lived on. Monarchs began creating orders of knighthood of their own, modeled in part on these original orders, but intended to bind the nobility to themselves. By the late 16th century, these monarchical orders inspired the formation of new orders of merit, which became common throughout Europe. The title of knight became an honorific title, totally unrelated to anything martial. Well, within the order, what we're trying to do is revive the original idea of that monastic order, the idea of people committed to service and to living according to a code of chivalry. Chivalry is derived from the French chevalier, which was their term for a knight. Chivalry comes from the Low Latin cabalus, which means horse. And of course, they were mounted. Codes of chivalry encourage knights to be brave, honorable, and to uphold the honor of women and to protect the weak. Even so, many knights failed to live up to these standards. Chevauchée, not chivalry, was often the order of the day in those times. So why chivalry in the modern era? Why should chivalry be a part of Wicca? If you go back to the roots of Wicca, you'll find that chivalry was one of the things that inspired Wicca in the first place. There was a thing called the Order of Woodcraft Chivalry. In 1900, an American born in Canada, Ernest Thomas Seton, attempted to deal with issues of juvenile delinquency by creating an organization that woodcraft and civilized values based on his knowledge of First Nations peoples. Seton's Indians, he called them, and they rapidly became popular, and in 1912 resulted in the publishing of a book, The Book of Woodcraft and Indian Lore. This is one of the principal influences leading to Robert Baden-Powell founding the Boy Scouts movement. In fact, Baden-Powell originally gave leadership of the North American part of his organization to Seton. Seton ultimately resigned from Baden-Powell's organization in 1915, where Baden-Powell's views were jingoistic and militaristic. Seton's were not, and ultimately led to differences between them. In 1916, Ernest Westlake, a naturalist, anthropologist, and traveler of Quaker upbringing, formed the Order of Woodcraft Chivalry in the United Kingdom, making Seton its honorary Grand Chieftain. In 1909, Westlake had forsaken Quakerism for the old gods of paganism, inspired by authors such as Ed Carpenter, Nietzsche, Havelock Ellis, Jane Ellen Harrison, Tyler, and Fraser. Westlake's Order of Woodcraft Chivalry avoided the military overtones of scouting, instead focusing on the virtues of kindness, fellowship, animal conservation, and woodcraft. Westlake saw women as incarnations of the gods, revered in the Jack and the Green, which he considered to be the English equivalent of Dionysus, and held that the trinity of woodcraft consisted of Pan, Artemis, and Dionysus. So it's not surprising that the Order of Woodcraft Chivalry, unlike scouting, accepted many of the premises of modern neo-paganism. Nature was described as the mistress and mother, God as creator and all-father, and Christ as the teacher, rather than as God incarnate. The greatest ceremony of the Order of Woodcraft Chivalry was lighting the campfire at their first folk moot ceremony in Lammas 1921, held on an estate in Sandy-Balls on the northern edge of the New Forest. The sacred fire was lit by 4 people dressed in the codes of the elements of each quarter, bringing greetings from the elemental powers in succession from north to the west. So chivalry's been there, the idea of this living according to a code, from very early on in neo-paganism. And what is the chivalric code that the Order of Paladins subscribes to? As follows: sincerity, courtesy, compassion, perseverance, industriousness, justice, loyalty, courage, self-discipline, humility, largesse, truth, and honor. So, go take a look at the PowerPoint presentation. There's additional information, energy exercises, and on heraldry, which will be useful to you in your studies. And go out there and be